Today, let's do an introduction to APIs for PowerApps and Power Automate people, right? We all use APIs all the time. They're integrated in everything we do in our apps and our flows, but in reality, a lot of us barely understand them. We just kind of fake it. So what I'm gonna try to do today is start over at the beginning and go through all this stuff. And don't worry, I'm not a developer. We're not going to use developer-y words. We're not going to be developers. We're just going to talk about how you and me, us low-code builders, can use APIs in what we do, make sense of them so we can start to use those to augment our apps. Sounding fun? Then let's just switch over to my desktop and take a look. So what is an API? An API is just a structured way to talk to a system. So it's how we can talk to SharePoint, Outlook, Dataverse, SQL, Salesforce, Twitter, YouTube, right? All of those different services out there are just systems running, right? We want to talk to those using our Power Apps and Power Automate. And so an API is the interchange, the application programming interface, I think is what it stands for. I'm positive of that, right? But that's the way that we talk to those. And so in reality, you're using those all the time, right? Like, so here, if I have a gallery, if we turn on the monitor right over here and say open monitor, now that this is running, if we go over here in our app and we say play, all right, this is just a SharePoint list. And I say, hey, filter it by just show me the people that are executives. And so by clicking that, if we look in monitor, look over here, like this is all the stuff we did. But if you go here to the network get rows, you can see that the formula data, right? That's my filter formula. But if you look at the data, look, it says, hey, I went to this API of providers, Microsoft API, SharePoint Online. I hit this data source with this table, did an operation, get the stuff. Like, look, this is the fancy URL that it hit. And then all of this stuff that came back is, or down here, is the response, right? And so this is all of the data, all the people that match that. So we're using APIs all the time, whether we realize it or not. But what's really nice is once we start to understand that we're using these APIs, then we can take more advantage of them and do a lot cooler things because we can learn to talk to these ourselves. Instead of today, we just write a filter formula that does it for us, and we're limited by what that filter formula can do. Okay, same type of thing. Like if you go over to flow, right? So I just wrote a simple one, just get items from that same list. And if we do a test of this real quick, test, look over here, we can see that it also just hit an API against a certain data set, right? What table it got. So it did all that for us. And then if you go down here, you can also see like the headers, the body, all this stuff that comes back, which in reality is all the people that were matched that get items, right? And so this is going to be the JSON. This is where we're going to spend most of our time because APIs are just kind of this idea that we talk to it, but the way that we talk to these APIs is using something called JSON. Okay, and so what is JSON, right? JSON is just a hipster way to spell Jason. No. JSON, J-S-O-N, is just text in curly brackets is the way I think about it, right? It is just a language, an interface, a structured language where we do pairs of information. So if we go over here, we're going to use a website called JSON Beautifier. We'll just delete out my little practice here. And so this is going to let us write and practice JSON. So for example, JSON, it looks very similar to when you do a patch, you're actually writing JSON, right? So we know what? You got a curly bracket, and then you give it a value, right? So this is this column of information, the property. And so like if we did something like name, notice it's in double quotes, and then colon equals, and then if we did something like this and we said buddy, and then another curly bracket, that is just JSON, right? So we have the curly brackets, which represents the object, the single record, the item, if you will, right? We're not too worried about words right now, but so curly brackets just say, hey, this is an item. And then it has one column with name and another one buddy. You could go here, you could do a comma. So if you want a second column, just like patch. And so we could say age, and then we could do a colon here. And then we could do buddy is what? Almost 2, I think, 1.5. I want to say 2, right? And so we've got that. And so that is a record in JSON. Now, if we use this little beautify button here, the reason we like this site is it does a good job of structuring this for you. And it has lots of ads, and who doesn't like ads, right? But it has this structuring and it can help you make sure that you're doing things right. Okay, so that's how you do a single record, a single item in JSON. What if you wanted to have multiple, right? You wanted to have a table or what they would call an array. So arrays are just represented by square brackets. So if we put square brackets around this little puppy, now what we're saying is we want to have multiple records. So we'd want another record with the same format, so we could just copy it. And then we'll throw another comma right here. And then we could do name, and then we could do me, and how old am I? I don't know, I'm like 46 or something. I think that's right. And so do the little beautify over here. Oh, now look, beautify is not working, right? And we see the little red. So this is where we get in trouble with JSON, especially when you're handcrafting. You don't have to handcraft it a lot, but it's easier to handcraft it in the beginning because you can see what's going on. And so if I look here, I have 2 curly braces. So we just want to delete that out. Now, hopefully, let's see, we've got that. Oh, because I lost the curly braces here, right? So square bracket, curly brackets, square bracket. All right, let's try beautify again. And so when it beautifies, A, it makes it easier to read, but B, that tells me that it's all good and all valid. So websites like this are very helpful when you're trying to parse or write your own JSON, which, like I said, you're not going to have to do very often. You're usually copying and pasting this stuff, but by learning to write it, you kind of start to get this understanding of what it is. And so, we've got this here, right? Looking good. We'll kind of push the beautify here. So now they match the 2 sides, very helpful. So what if we wanted to have one like we know in my data set, we have something called skills, right? So we do a comma, we can hit enter. And so we'll do skills. Now, in the case of skills, that one is a table of data as well, right? So you can actually have tables inside of records, right? Like you can have this weird nesting, and when you look at it, it looks really scary, but reality, once you understand that, well, if I want a table, I know I'm gonna have to have some square brackets. And then inside there, I got to have something, right? Oh, not like that. So a little shift there. So then now we could say something like value equal, or put our value in quotes, and then equals, and then how about ninja, right? I got ninja skills. And then we would do outside of that, we'd copy or do a comma. I would probably copy this, copy, and then paste this in. And so then instead of ninja, we would have sewing. I don't know. I just make up weird stuff, right? And so if we can beautify it, then we can see that that is broken out. So what do we have here? We have a square bracket. So we have a table of data. In that table, we have a record of information. It has 3 properties: name, buddy, age, 2, skill. And that property, its data is a table. So there's a table inside of here. And in that table, there is a value ninja and a value sewing. I'm so weird. Record in there, right? And then now, of course, we'd probably want that same one down there. So we would just copy this and go right here, and then we can just paste. And now we would repeat that, right? But once again, it's not about writing it. It's about not being afraid of it and seeing how easy it is to write your own JSON usually helps kind of that light bulb come on. Because, right, I can't tell you how much time I spent thinking about this video. So while I was editing it, I said, wait a minute, I didn't cover some more basics. I want to go over a couple more things while I'm here, right? And so one of them is, you might have noticed when I did age, I did 2 without the quotes around it, right? So you can do that for numbers. This would tell it that age is a number. Same thing if I did 2.5, right? It would have no problem with that because it would understand that that is a number with a decimal point. So keep that in mind, that it understands that. Now there are a couple other formats that will sometimes come up. And so for example, if I want to say good at their job, and so if that was going to be a Boolean, then I could just go here and say true and put our comma in. And so good at their job is either now a Boolean, true or false. And so I just use the word true or false. Notice once again, no quotes. And if you hit the beautify, you can see that it works. So you know that it is valid. Also, if I wanted to do something like null, you would do work done, right? This is buddy we're talking about, and null. And once again, we hit beautify and we can see that pulls over. So keep that in mind, that you have the ability to control this. Like if you're getting this, like if we blow this out here real quick, boom. So if we go back over here, right, remember we did all this. And so we got all this body back. And so if we pull this out, so we're going to click in there and then copy that. We can go bring that over here, paste it in, and say beautify that. And so look, you can see that when we did that request for get items, what's the first thing? It got back a record. It got one item back. In that record, there is a property called value, and inside there is a table. And then in that table, right, we have a record. And so then we start to see different things. We can see like there's a title, there's a first name, last name. You can see that favorite color is actually, and we know this, right, is a complex column in SharePoint. It is a field, right? But we can see the raw data, right? This is very helpful when you start trying to understand what's going on, Because now we aren't just beholden to what Flow gave us back. We're able to go through this and comprehend what we're seeing here, right? If we go down here, look, there's skills. Skills, we see the square brackets, so we know that's a table. And then the table looks like there's different skills, and there's a value of PowerApps, Power Automate, Power BI, and Puzzle. So those are Nicola's skills. And if we kind of kept going down here, eventually we would see the close, right? So this is the end of Nicola's record, comma. And so we start another one. And then this is Greg's record, the second record, right? So you got back all that JSON. It looks really overwhelming and scary, but when you start just slowing down and say, hey, okay, right? We have one record, one thing came back, column was value, and then we had a table inside there, and then there was all these other records. We can start to kind of piece this together. And if we go back over here to monitor, right, that same exact stuff is what came back here. So if we scroll down just a little bit more, right? So look, in the body of the request was a value, right? There's that single one, there's the value, and then there's the O tag information for Nicola. Same information. So both Power Automate and PowerApps got the same information back. They just both have a different interface that, hides that from you, keeps you from having to worry about it. But in reality, it is there for you to investigate and understand. Now, the real reason we want to learn this, right? Because you're like, well, Shane, it already does all that for me. I know, but the easiest way to learn stuff is by doing something you already know how to do. So by looking at, JSON that is coming back from an API that you've been using for months, years, whatever already, it hopefully makes it easier for you to connect the dots. Because now, right, we can also start to then say, okay, well, what if I want to use an API? I want to use an external API, a scary third-party API. Very cool. That's what we want to do here. So let's mess with a third-party API. So we're going to go over here and we'll go to this site, JSON placeholder. Remember, all these links are down below if you want to use them. There's also some links to my fancy training. I don't know why you guys aren't signed up for my training classes. They're lots of fun, but anyway. So this is a website, or jsonplaceholder.typecode.com. It is a great first API to explore, okay? If you kind of scroll down the page, you're gonna be like, hey, we've got this API. It's got some posts, some comments. It's got some different methods. We got to talk about what those are. So it gives you a way to start to interact with an API. So what we're going to do is we're going to interact with this. So let's go over here. We're going to use Flow because I think Flow is the easiest place to first wrap your head around an API. We'll get rid of this get items, right? We don't need it no more. And so we're going to do a plus, add an action, and we're going to do HTTP. Okay, so this is a way for you to talk to APIs using Flow right down here. All right, so we're going to use HTTP. Now, this is a premium connector, so it would make the Flow premium. So if you're going to talk to third-party APIs, you are going to have to worry about licensing. We're not getting a licensing, but know that you are going to have to do that. And so now it says, all right, well, if you want to talk to an API, well, what URL do you want to go to, right? Or URI, but whatever, right? Where do you want to go? So if we jump over here to this site, they tell us that, hey, all of our stuff comes from this lovely site, right? So we can copy this and we can go over here. And so we're going to say, all right, we want to get from there. Now, when you put that in, right, that's the URL. And so then now there's this thing called methods, right? So when you talk to an API, you have to do one of these methods. And so when you start with these, right, the easiest one to understand is get. Get is give me information, right? Read from that API. So when we were saying get items, we were reading the information. We were getting the info. Okay, so get is to get information. The second most commonly used one is going to be post. I want to write to this API. I want to give the API something. And so it might be a command like create me an item, or it might be something like send an email, or create a post in this, right? I want you to do something. I want you to create a new item or type in action, right? So posting is pushing stuff up. Now, similar to post is put. The difference between post and put, right? This is one of those confusing ones, is we use put when we want to overwrite something. So say, for example, we were trying to post and create a new SharePoint item, that would do that. But if I wanted to overwrite an existing SharePoint item, then I might do a put, right? I don't think SharePoint actually does puts, but the idea of a put is to overwrite something, whereas post is to create new or augment, even edits, right? All that would be done with post. So puts don't come up very often, but that's for completely overwriting a record. We also have patch, right? So patch is for editing items. So patching, overwrite, editing an existing item. So I said that post can also do that because depending on the API, sometimes you just post to it and you say, hey, post these updates. Sometimes you are patching. So it's going to depend on the API, which one is you use. And then last but not least, we have delete. And so delete is, I want to delete the item, right? So delete is another method. So which ones of these you use is going to depend on what the API tells you. A lot of times though, I would say 99% of the stuff I've ever done has either been a get some information or post some information. So right now we want to get from there. Now we want to get, but we want to get some specific information. So back over here. And so say that we want to get these posts, right? So if you click here, you're going to see that when I click on this, that your browser will do a get. So since this API just lets you hit a get like this, like when we do this, it returns JSON, right? We're going to do this over in the flow, but this tells me this is the URL. This is why this one's really nice to practice with. So we're just going to take this post and we're just going to go add this over here, right? Because we want to put that on the end right there. Now, does it need headers or queries? So in this case, it does not, right? So this particular API says, hey, I don't need any of that stuff. It doesn't need a body because you're just saying, I want to get whatever comes back from there. And we don't have any type of cookie because we don't have any authentication. So if we test this, so let's say save, and we're just going to manually trigger it because we've changed the actions. We'll do a test. It's probably underneath my face and say run the flow, but you know how it works, and then done. Okay, so our flow ran successfully. If we click on the HTTP action here, if we look in the outputs, right, so what came back, look down here, there is the body. And so it returned this user ID, item, body, etc. Notice it returned it, right? There's a square bracket, so it returned it as a table. And then there's all these records. And, you know, as we just saw, like we went over here, we can see this is literally the same stuff it returned. The nice thing here, though, is that now that we've kind of seen that that works programmatically, we know that we could go through that data and get it pulled into our app, right? And so how would we pull that into our Power App? So we could then go here, we would say Control A, Control C, we don't need to copy this output. Okay, we'll go back over here and we're going to say edit. And what we need to do now is we need to say insert a new action and we're going to parse JSON. Okay, so this is an action for breaking that down. So if you do this, and so in here it says, all right, I need the schema. I need to know how the data is structured. We could write this by hand. I don't want to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to say use sample payload to generate schema. We're going to paste in the output of what came through and say done. And so look, it says, okay, that data was a type of an array, right? We knew that square bracket. In there was an items property, right? And once again, we can kind of validate this. So all the way back to the top. Right, so in the items, we're going to hopefully see user ID, blah, blah, blah. So let's look. There it is. So properties, right? User ID, and it was a type of integer. ID type is an integer, title is a string, body is a string. So this is using JSON. This is JSON writing to say this is the format that we're expecting back. But the reason we do this is now inside of our flow, right? We can then hit a little plus here, add an action, and we can do a compose. And inside here, we now have the dynamic content of, look, there's the body user ID, title, body, the whole item that came back, and then the whole table. So by using the parse JSON, it broke it into pieces. So now we can pull out and get the title of all that stuff. And because it's in an array, right, it automatically made a for each loop because it knows it would have to loop through all 100 records. Right, we don't want to focus too much on the flow side, but I want you to see that parse JSON is your friend in getting this data back. What I really want to do is go back over here and try something a little harder, right? Because that was pretty easy. So if we go back to here, okay, so they have these different ones. So these are just getting straight data back, but it's like, hey, we got harder stuff. Go check out the guide. So anytime that you're using an API, you want to find the guide or the documentation. And so in this case, it's like, hey, if you want to get a resource, now this happens a lot. Look, they're like, hey, we're using this fetch API stuff. And I'm like, I don't know what fetch API is. I've never used it. I don't care. But what I see here is that if I use this URL, and now we kind of understand it, we know that that's the post, right? That was all of them. Post/1, well, that's probably the first post. And so then that would return just the first post for us, right? And we could probably copy this, paste it up here. Look at that. So it just returns the first record. If we change post from 1 to 15 and hit enter, now we see the 15th record, right? So that's how that API works. If you want to get a specific one, you just append to post the ID of the record you want. All right, we've learned something. So now we go back over here. So that's getting a resource, right? Pretty simple. List. So this was what we just did. This was what got us all of them, right? So we've done that. All right, cool, cool, cool. Okay, now creating a resource. This is much more complicated. Now, once again, we're ignoring the whole fetch thing, but notice they're using post still. But this time the method, so before they haven't told us a method. So we knew that the method was get, right? Because we were trying to get info. But now they're saying, hey, if you do a post, something different will happen. All right, so if we go over here, let's delete all this stuff because I got a little crazy, right? Delete and delete this one, okay? So if we go back to this, so we still want to use post, but now we're going to change the method to post, right? Post and post. Sorry, I probably should have used something different than post, but what do you do? Okay, so we're going to post to that. Now, if we go back over here, so in here, they're like body, JSON, stringify, right? Anytime you see things like stringify, stuff like that, like that's a function as part of that fetch stuff, I assume. I don't know. But when you, right, all that's really saying is turn this into text. So different languages require different stuff. What I'm after are things that I understand. So I can see that it says, hey, there's a body here. And then we want to have, look at this. I know right here, that is a record, right? And so that format, title, body, and user ID, that matches the stuff we did before. So what if we copy that, jump over here? So we don't want to put that in headers. We don't want to put that in queries, but there is a body section. And so we could post that in. And so what this is saying is that I want to create a item in post, right? So I'm going to post to it, and I'm going to post this JSON, title foo, body footbar, user ID 1. Now when we click out, we immediately get a inner valid JSON. So even though we copied their stuff in, but if we look, we can tell it's not well formed. Now, if you're struggling with this, right? So let's copy this out. If we're like, hey, I can't figure out why this isn't valid JSON. One of my tricks is my dear friend ChatGPT, right? We'll come over here and say, please help me figure out why this isn't valid JSON. We'll hit enter. And so look, because ChatGPT is my friend, it said, here's what you did wrong. Here's what it should look like. So let's just copy what it gave us, copy code. And let's jump back over here and let's just paste this in. Click out. Oh, look, it's much happier. So it changed all those single quotes to be double quotes, and then it, updated things. There was also at one point there was an extra comma at the end of this. I don't know if it fixed that or if I fixed that, but somewhere along the way there was an extra comma. Either way, that is looking good. So now we can go back over here. And so next up we see that it also wants headers, right? So if we copied this out, this is the header that it wants. Now, what you can do though, is you could copy here. And so we go back up here to header, right? What is the key? It is that. We'll go back over here and then copy and then back over here and paste this in as a value. Okay. So Flow has this nice little interface for doing headers. What you'll find is that when you work with APIs, like some of them have lots of headers, some of them have no headers. In the case of this one, like the post needs a header, the get did not, like you're just going to kind of see a mixed bag. But all I'm looking for, what I'm stealing from their documentation is, does they reference a header? If they do, then I'm going to put that in there. You can also, if you click right here and switch to text mode, you can see that it wrote this out for us, right? This is also well-formatted JSON, right? It has the curly brackets, the stuff in here. If there's multiple headers, it'd be a comma and then another line. So this is another way you can copy and paste stuff in, depending on where you're getting the documentation, how many headers you have and things like that, okay? So if we look now, that all looks good. And it says, hey, if you get this output, then you know that you have successfully posted. All right. So let's go back over here and let's do another test. Save. Now we should just be able to do the automatic, and we'll say test again down here at the bottom. And look at that, your flow ran successfully. And now if we click here, right, we can see the inputs. This is the stuff that we did. And then the outputs, there's the body, and it created our stuff. Woohoo! Right? So we successfully posted. Now with that API, it's a fake post. Don't overthink it, but it's a good way for you to practice reading and writing. And so now you can start to work your way through their guide, right? So here's how you do a put if you want to overwrite one, right? And same thing, there's a URL, you're telling it the post one. So I want to overwrite number one. We're doing a put, that's overwrite. JSON stringify, we ignore, but look, there's the body again. There's a header again, and then it tells you what you should. If you wanted to do a patch, it shows you that. You can see with a patch, you're just updating just the title, but same type of thing. And then there's delete. So all of those are different ways to use this. Now, speaking of my friend ChatGPT, if you're having a hard time with something like this, right? One of the things that I have done in the past, if you've got the version of ChatGPT that ChatGPT Pro, right, I can go over here and say something like, please read this web page so you can help me with their API, and then send the message. And so then now, right, what's happening? ChatGPT is ingesting all that. It's taking this as temporary input. And so now it does this. And then you can say something like, using Power Automate Cloudflow, tell me how to create a new resource. And then what it should spit out here is instructions that are very flow specific that will help you do this. And so look at this. I'm not going to read it all to you, but basically it would hold your hand through it. So if you're using a new API and you're having a hard time translating their documentation into what you want with Flow, then let ChatGPT do it for you. Oh, and look, it also works in Copilot, right? So go check out my AI class. What is the difference between the two? But both of them were able to successfully solve that question for us. Okay, now there's one more thing down here I want to talk about, one of the APIs. And so we scroll all the way to the bottom. They also talked about filtering resources. And so here you can see that they're using a parameter, right? They're doing a query at the end. So post question mark user ID equals 1. So what we could do, right? There's nothing else we know this is just a get. So let's just copy this and throw this up there. And so then this is saying, hey, get all the records where the user ID value is 1, right? So boom, 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 boom. When we did our PowerApps filter, right? Like we didn't really pay attention to what it was because we weren't ready for it yet. But if you look at the URL, it has the same thing. See the question mark? So parameter filter equals department equals executive, right? So add a filter to this, department equals executive. So that's how it only got back the executives, right? When we did this. So all of this is exposed in your API. So once you understand that, right, like that shouldn't scare you more. Like, what is a question mark? Question mark just means do something else. Even when you go to a Power App, right? Like parameters are a thing. We use those in deep linking. It's just a normal part of it, but now you're understanding that the question mark is another way that some APIs let you use this. Now, if you're looking for an API to play with, right, that put the JSON placeholder one down there, I'm also going to put a link to this API, publicapis.org entries. And so this is 1,400 different APIs. So like if you want one with daily cat facts or dog facts or dog images, or, weather data, like there are literally probably millions of APIs on the internet that are free for you to take advantage of once you start to query these. Now, some of them are going to require other things. And one of the hardest things you'll run into is something called authentication. Well, you know what authentication is, but authentication, right, there's different ways that you can do it, right? So there are, OData ways, there's headers, there's cookies. So one of the nice things is like when you're first starting with APIs, just start with anonymous APIs, ones that'll let you hit them directly. As you get more advanced and I want to talk to SharePoint, I want to go, create a SharePoint site with an API. You can do that. There's video up there. And so in that one, Flow has a special SharePoint HTTP action. So anytime you're interacting with any of SharePoint, there's an HTTP action. If you're going to interact with the Office graph, there's a special API or a Flow action for that as well. So those handle the authentication to the Office 365 services for you. So if you're going to talk to Office 365 service, you want to use one of those to handle the authentication. But if you start wanting to do things like, so my light switch, right? Like if I hit the off button on my Stream Deck here, it turns off my lights, right? Like how crazy is that? If we hit on, it'll turn the lights back on. And so that's because my light switch has an API. But my light switch, I don't want you guys turning off and on for me. It is authenticated. But so with that one, the first call to that one is I get a token, right? It gives me a little token. And so then for every request, I add that token in there. And that's what tells me I've authenticated. So every API is different. We're not going to explore authenticated today, but keep that out. If you want to see like how I turn the lights on and off, right? That's using something called my Casa, I don't know, whatever that light switch is. I'll put a link. There's a video up to that one up there as well. Okay. So hopefully this introduction API helps you be less scared of them, that you shouldn't be scared of them. It's just a bunch of text at the end of the day. I've even went as far as to work with APIs in other languages because it was just text. They told me what the word was in Dutch. I found the word inside the text, played the match game, wrote my filter queries, all that. I don't speak an ounce of Dutch, but I was able to do it because it's just text at the end of the day. Okay. So questions, comments, leave them below. Would you like to see more of this stuff? Then I'm going to need a lot of prodding. I don't know how many people watched an API video to this point. So if you really want to see me go deeper in APIs, you can do that. Or my 401 training class already has a bunch of extensive APIs, custom connectors, that type of stuff. So yeah, with that, I'm going to say thanks and have a great day.